Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Langbart, and I'm honored to be moderating today's session. I'm a cattle producer and a member of the Kansas Beef Council's Executive Committee. I'm pleased to see so many of you taking advantage of today's event. This is our third virtual meeting in the series Beef Insights. The first webinar in March highlighted how domestic consumers have responded to those unprecedented events that took place in 2020. And how Beef, It's What's for Dinner, and other checkoff-led programs have addressed these opportunities and challenges. In our second webinar in June, we showcased the latest findings of a beef checkoff-funded research project at Kansas State University. We heard from animal sciences professor, Dr. Travis O'Quinn, and looked at what research is telling us regarding alternative proteins. Today, as we get started with our third Beef Insights meeting, just a few brief housekeeping items. All attendees will be muted during the presentation for the best sound quality for everyone. Please hold all questions to the end and we will get those answered. You can either type into the chat box and I can ask those of our presenter, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. And lastly, this webinar, as well as the previous two, recorded and will be available on the kansasbeef.org website under the Beef Hub tab. So now to the main event. This afternoon, we have a great session in store for you. The presentation and discussion is going to cover the health reasons consumers choose to limit their beef intake. It will give some new research findings on beef's health benefits, and we'll also learn about current checkoff efforts to reach key figures like physicians and nutrition experts. I'm excited to introduce our presenter, Dr. Shailene McNeil. Dr. McNeil is a registered dietitian, a nutrition scientist, and her title is Executive Director of Nutrition, Science, Health, and Wellness for NCBA. You should know that Dr. McNeil is well respected by her peers as a leader in research and science communications, mostly regarding beef's role in healthy and active lifestyles. For almost 20 years, Dr. McNeil has been dedicated to researching and applying evidence on the importance of nourishing, wholesome foods. She promotes healthy lifestyles using sound facts. She reaches out to many audiences with science-based information, including nutrition scientists, registered dietitians, pediatricians, and family physicians, and also fitness professionals. She often meets with the media to tell the true beef story. And as she is today, she shares beef's message with the ag community. As a Texan who grew up in agriculture, Dr. McNeil says she considers it a privilege to work for America's beef producers. She lives in a rural community alongside farmers and ranchers and says she's proud her children are learning and being shaped by those traditional rural values we all recognize, such as stewardship, accountability, and the importance of a strong work ethic. Dr. McNeil holds a bachelor's degree in biomedical science and a doctorate in human nutrition from Texas A&M University. So, ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Dr. Shailene McNeil as our presenter today. Hello, Dr. McNeil, and welcome.
Appreciate the opportunity to spend some time talking about it today. Let's see if I can get my slides to advance now. Here we go. That's what we want to talk about today. We want to hit on three areas that John asked me to focus on. We want to talk a little bit about some of the market research insights that we have about what are those health reasons that consumers choose and limit beef. As was said, I've been on board now almost 20 years, and some of those nutrition reasons have stayed the same, but some of them have started to evolve a little bit too. So I want to hit on some of those market research insights the checkoff is able to bring to our programming so that we better understand a little bit more about what's going on in consumers' minds about health. Then I want to talk about some new research on beef's benefits for health. There's some areas that we've been focusing on more of late because of some new science and some new attention around the science. I want to make sure that I give you a quick heads up on that. And then I want to share a little bit about what we're doing to reach physicians and nutrition experts with this content. Certainly as part of our overall Beef It's What's for Dinner brand marketing, nutrition is embedded in that. So when we're doing any kind of communication with consumers, a lot of times there's nutrition messages focused in on that for the direct consumer. But a lot of what I want to focus on today is maybe programs you don't hear as much about or see as much about. And that's the work that we're doing, not only at a national level, but Abby Hadari and her team, I know, do even at a state level to reach physicians and nutrition experts who then can carry that information forward to consumers as well. As it was mentioned, I've been on Beef's team for almost 20 years. A little bit of background about me. My husband works in animal health on the actually for Elanco on the animal health side. We've got 2 daughters, Kate and Kirby. Kate's a sophomore in college at Texas A&M. She's an animal science major and wants to head on to dental school. And Kirby's keeping us on our toes. She's a junior in high school now. And as I look to like how we've raised the girls and the kind of ways that we eat and the struggles that so many people, our family and friends, have about health and nutrition, I just think about how much beef has played a role in the way that we eat and the way that so many people we know eat and the way that most of our consumers eat. It's just a central part, a foundational part, we sometimes say, to eating today. And certainly from a dietitian's lens, I definitely can see how it's been an instrumental part in the way that we fed our families and what I truly believe has helped both of my girls to nourish and grow. So that's obviously my bias, a bias I'm sure many of us on this call today also share. I think that if we think about the overall diet in America, look at these little bubbles with these numbers in them and think about report card grades. So this is how the American diet by different age groups is faring with regards to their diet intake and meeting their diet goals. And as you could see, if you've got any kids at home or remember having that, you wouldn't want anybody bring home a report card with these kinds of grades on it. And basically the take home message is that really, regardless of the age and stage that we're in, most Americans on a scale of 1 to 100 really are not doing a very good job with their diets. Most people would be getting a D or failing. So there's a lot of room for improving the way that we eat today. And I think that it's fantastic that the beef industry has a focus on nutrition, because I think all food producers really do have a role and have a seat at the table in terms of the discussions that we need to be having to help Americans build and choose healthier diets overall. From a beef perspective, a beef-centric perspective, one of the tools that I often bring up and talk to when we're talking to registered dietitians or other health professionals is our statement of principles regarding nutrition and health. And basically what this is a document that we've had since the 1980s. We've refreshed it every now and then with new images, but essentially the principles are the same. It outlines what we stand for and what we believe in as a beef community when it comes to diet and health. And this is where, we are grounded in the concept that balance, variety, and moderation and physical activity are the keys to health. And that we do support the recommendations of the dietary guidelines, and we do try to help Americans achieve beef intake within the context of the American diet, of the dietary guidelines for Americans. I think that's important because, especially as I talk to a group from the beef community, I think we get a lot of pressures and we evaluate a lot of the research on things, fads and emerging diet trends that come up. Paleo is one, keto is another, low carb, and all of those can be part of how we think about healthy and balanced diets. But as a general rule of thumb, we try to have a pretty balanced approach towards nutrition, very inclusive. Sometimes I say that I think we promote vegetables and fruits as much as we do beef, because we're always talking about how we the benefits of health really come through a balanced diet with beef. So I wanted to kind of make this document, you aware of this document, because it's a very helpful tool that you can have to ground a discussion that you might be having in nutrition with an audience. I want to share a little bit of good news and bad news. I know that you've had some market research insights before, but I think nutrition, a lot of times we're on the defensive with nutrition, and people might think that overall we sort of have a negative image of beef in general, not just on nutrition, but it does feel like beef is picked on quite a bit on various topics. But I think I always like to go back to our market research and remind myself that when it comes to consumers' general perceptions about beef, we're still real positive. 70% of consumers are positive about beef perceptions, or neutral. 20%, about 19% are neutral. And we only have about 11% that are really negative. So it's always that squeaky wheel that gets the grease, and sometimes that's the attention. But I like to remind myself that when you're talking to the public about beef and health, you're probably starting from a place where that consumer is generally positive about beef, or people around them may be. So I think a lot of times we forget about that. Now, the bad news is chicken still beats us a little bit in terms of the positive perceptions, and that's sort of our number one competitor in the protein space. And so when we'll see that nutrition plays a role in that, especially, you know, some of the places where beef perceptions are lower than chicken is in the area of nutrition. This is a slide that you'll also see us use quite a bit when we look at what's driving future consumption of beef. That little box, that little circle number, 62% in the top right, is really an important one, because that's telling us that 62% of consumers are expecting to eat about the same amount of beef that they've heard. So they're pretty resilient to all the things that they see and hear in the media. Most people are planning to eat just about the same amount of beef that they're eating now. But when we dig a little bit deeper to say, well, what are the reasons that you would eat more beef? What we see is that these are some of the reasons. And taste, and adding protein to your diet, and quick and easy, probably the things that would make you choose a food more often. These are common drivers of food choice, reasons to eat more. This is some of the reasons that people are eating more beef. And adding protein to your diet is one of those positive nutrition compelling reasons why people are adding more beef to their diet. But when you look at the reasons to eat less, about 16% of the folks who say that they are going to eat less, this is what's driving that. That it's 4 out of 5 reasons are health related. And this, we have collected this kind of data for as long as I can remember at the Beef Checkoff, and there have been very similar answers. Nutrition is still the main reason why people who are going to eat less say that they are. It's either this general idea that other meats are healthier. You've probably heard that. And price does squeak in there, but most of those reasons are nutrition. They're concerned that beef will negatively impact their long-term health. So they're thinking about chronic disease like diabetes and heart disease and cancer. We're hearing more and more about plant-based diet. They're trying to eat more plant-based diets. And then just this fat hangover that we still have, that the consumer still thinks that beef has too much fat. And that's important when we get to talking a little bit later about where we talk about lean and how we talk about lean, and some considerations around that. But the good news is, and the thing that I think that we all have going for us, is that meat has nourished for over 2.5 million years. This is an image, a photo of fossil bone that was butchered by an early human over 1.5 million years ago. It's just showing evidence of meat eating. And we know that we probably have bigger brains, bigger stomachs, but still have smaller stomachs, bigger brains and smaller stomachs, but still have the agility and mobility from the meat nutrients that we've incorporated into our human diet for many years. And if we haven't had an appreciation for how much nutrition really does play a role in helping us thrive, I think COVID really brought nutrition back to the spotlight, because what we know now is that if you have an increased risk for chronic disease, diet related disease, as we sometimes call them, so things like diabetes, or you're overweight, or you've got heart disease, and you're exposed to COVID, it hits you a lot harder. And those individuals who are overfed maybe, but undernourished, are really at risk for having worse consequences from COVID. On the other hand, we know that for the benefits of immune function and things that could potentially help with COVID protection, many of the micronutrients that beef provides are worth exploring in terms of how we can help our immune function through healthy and balanced diets that include beef. So I think COVID's brought nutrition more back into the forefront, and we're seeing that conversation within the influencers and audiences that we work with, making that topic front and center. I often say that few foods nourish and sustain like beef. When we can talk about increasing vegetable consumption and trying to get my kids to eat more broccoli and Brussels sprouts, and those are things that I definitely have encouraged. But when you actually think about the foods that we can choose to eat and the actual nutrition, the vitamins and minerals, the basic nutrition that it provides, there are few foods that offer as many nutrients as beef does. So broccoli is really great, but you're only going to get 2 or 3 nutrients. And yes, you're going to get phytochemicals. It's really just hard to get a food that what we sometimes use the term nutrient dense or nutrient rich. And that's because a lot of us talk about zip with beef, and that's a great message, zinc, iron, and protein. But there's also phosphorus and niacin and riboflavin and choline and selenium and several B vitamins. These are nutrients that you need for all kinds of body functions, just for basic health and for energy and metabolism and all of these nutrients. And many of these nutrients, as I'll show you in a bit, are short in the American diet. We're not getting the nutrients that we need. So the fact that beef is so nutrient dense is really one of the aspects that make it unique. Because of meat's nutrients, what you'll see is that when you look across the different life stages, beef can help strengthen the plate. Beef can play a role at various life stages that individuals may be going through. Starting out in the early years, we'll talk more about this too, but that high quality protein and those nutrients that are needed when infants are so rapidly growing or children are rapidly growing, those nutrients that I just showed you on that slide are critical to optimizing growth and development in young children and children all the way through adolescence until they're fully grown. In those middle stages of life, once we're fully grown and we're just trying to maintain our basic health and basic nutrition, one of the things that I often think about is how beef plays a role, because if you're eating beef, you're probably not eating something else that actually is very likely less nutrient dense. I certainly know the nights that we don't end up cooking a meal at home and we don't have a beef meal, we might eat chips and salsa for dinner. So it's very common that if you have a beef meal, you're going to be substituting out something maybe less nutrient dense that you would have. And in that way, that's a good health benefit. And then towards the later end of life, where protein and maintaining muscle becomes so important, that beef's that high quality protein that helps give your muscles what you need to help maintain muscle, to keep you living independent longer, and also provide those critical nutrients that you need as you age as well. So lots of different benefits that the research has shown across the various life stages that make beef super relevant to some different targets that we might be talking to and in our marketing efforts as well. There's a lot of competition in the protein space. If you have been to the grocery store or even the convenience store and picked up a snack lately, what you've seen is everybody is talking about their protein on their package. And it's not just other meat proteins, but there's plant proteins, there's snack foods. I mean, every package is really highlighting the protein. And I showed you that's one of the reasons why consumers want to eat beef more often, is because of the protein. We definitely have seen so much attention on increasing the protein throughout the diet, but there's a lot of competition in that marketplace. And so I often get the question, is there anything unique about beef that we could market and position? Is there something better about beef? And, if you think about it just in terms of the protein, no, because chicken has good quality protein too. So I like to think about it more holistically as what's the whole package of beef bring. And when you think about it that way, I do think that beef has something special to offer. I think we all agree on that too. But what does really make beef protein unique? And I've been thinking about that. Definitely something we've thought about a lot. We've actually tried to do research on that to tease out some specific health benefit that beef protein provides that maybe chicken protein doesn't provide or soy protein doesn't provide. But it really comes back to this combination. And I'm going to hit on each of these 4 components, because definitely beef is high quality protein. And that means that it has all of the essential amino acids in the right proportions that your body needs to support growth and development. And even when you're not growing and developing, just to support your body mass. And you'll hear that there's other high quality proteins like animal proteins, meat and eggs. And you'll also hear that there's even some plant proteins that are complete proteins. You might have heard that before. For example, quinoa is a complete protein, or soy is a complete protein. And that's true, but there's a little bit of a distinction between a complete protein and a high quality protein. And beef is high quality in that it doesn't just have the amino acids that you need. It also has them in the right proportions and in the ways that your body can use most effectively and most efficiently to do things that are important, like grow and develop and build muscle and maintain muscle and all the functions that protein provides. So it's high quality protein. Then it's also essential nutrients. It's all those nutrients that I talked about. And what really I think makes it unique, it's those nutrients that we need more of in our diet. So chicken has nutrients for sure, pork has nutrients, but beef has iron and highly available, absorbable, really good quality iron. And that's a nutrient that many Americans need more of. So you're getting great nutrients as well. Then you top on the great flavor that beef provides. And now you start having a food that has nutrition and taste. And then we really start to get to something a little bit more unique, because quite honestly, very few health foods taste really great to folks. So, it's hard to find a protein bar that really tastes as good as beef. You won't find a protein bar, I don't think, that most consumers would agree tastes as good as beef. So you've got that great flavor, and that's really great. As we've been thinking and hearing more about the discussion about sustainable diets and what makes a healthy, sustainable diet, I've added to my list, my nutrition list of what makes beef protein unique. And I'm adding that it's the ruminant upcycling. And I'm sure you'll be talking about sustainability more. But the point that I want to make here is that in addition to providing high quality protein and essential nutrients and great flavor, in today's discussion about which protein should really be recommended to nourish people the best, I do think it's critically important that beef cattle are ruminants, because they're able to eat things that humans can't eat, that's not in competition with the food supply, and upgrade that or upcycle it or make more protein out of it. And protein that then again is great tasting, high in nutrients and high quality protein. So this combination, I can't think of another protein that is high quality, that provides essential nutrients like beef does, that tastes as good as beef, that is also generated through upcycling and from a lower quality food source to a higher quality food source. So I think that's an important concept that I wanted to share with you. One of the things that dietitians love to see, and if you have an opportunity to talk about protein and beef protein with your various audiences, I would highly suggest that you use this visual, because it's very effective. People love to see this. It shows how much of another food that you would have to eat in terms of calories and amounts to get the same amount of protein as beef. And this is what I talk about beef being protein dense. You can get a lot of protein for fewer calories. So most plant proteins have 2 to 3 times the amount of calories to get the same protein. I know a lot of moms, even in my circle of friends, who slap on some peanut butter on their kids' toast in the morning and think that that's great because they got all the protein that they needed for breakfast. And as you'll see, you'd have to eat a lot of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein as you would from 3 ounces of beef. Another piece is that we've been talking about more recently, and this is sort of recent research. North Dakota Beef Council funded some of this work, as well as we did this particular study. We funded it at NCBA through beef checkoff dollars. Not all proteins are created equal. I don't know if you have ever, followed a diet plan or looked at like a Weight Watchers program or something. And there's this term that's sometimes used in nutrition called ounce equivalents. So if you're picking your meat source or your protein source, sometimes you'll see an ounce equivalent. So you can have 1 ounce of beef or 1 ounce of chicken. And if you want to add in an egg, for example, they would say that 1 ounce of beef is equal to 1 egg, or ounce equivalents for protein that are non-meat based, you would see like 1 ounce of beef is equal to 1/4 cup of kidney beans or 1 tablespoon of peanut butter. It's called ounce equivalents, and it's a way that gives people choices within their food groups they're following. Meal planning, diet planning, and dietary guidelines for Americans actually uses that same term. So how you can like swap in foods to meet your nutritional needs. Well, researchers that we've worked with had wanted to ask the question, is an ounce equivalent really an ounce equivalent? Like, is that true that if you just eat 1 ounce of sirloin, it's the same for your muscles, for example, as eating the same amount, 1/4 cup of kidney beans? And what they showed is no, it's not the same. It's that while the dietary guidelines or Weight Watchers programs or meal planning can call them ounce equivalents, the body doesn't really treat them the same way. So an ounce of sirloin is going to be better at what we call anabolic efficiency, the ability of muscle to start to build and protein to accumulate and muscle to build, better than the same 1 ounce equivalent, which would be 1/4 cup of kidney beans. And so in general, animal proteins are better than plant proteins. And in particular for anabolic efficiency, sirloin actually even beat eggs and pork for this. But in general, most of the research results from this study showed that animal proteins do a better job of plant proteins. And that's why it's important that we talk about not all dietary proteins are created equal. Another aspect to that is regarding the plant-based alternatives. These plant alternatives, they're being marketed like meat or as a substitute for meat. This actually is the research that I wanted to highlight that North Dakota Beef Council helped support as well. As you know, many of these meat alternative products have nutrition labels that look very similar to a beef patty. And that's because they can add in the amount of protein, they can add in synthetic vitamins and minerals to make the numbers match what real beef patty would look like. And that's kind of what's depicted in this image on the right, where these different products and how their nutrition labels are really similar. But what these researchers from Duke University did is they ran an analysis called metabolomics, where they start to look at the metabolites of these ingredients. They're digging a little bit deeper beyond the nutrition label and analyzing the compounds in the different products. And what they showed is that they're very different. In fact, there was, I think, 90% difference in the metabolites between a beef patty and a meat alternative patty. And that's depicted as, you don't see a lot of the red in these two columns on your slide, where there's red, the column of the alternative product is blue. So you can see how different they actually are. And the takeaway is these researchers didn't make a conclusion that maybe one is better than the other, but what they did say was, we've got to acknowledge that they're not really alternatives to meat because they're not nutritionally the same as meat. And I think that's a really important topic and something that we're continuing to talk about when we're working with other health professionals, dietitians and doctors and that kind of thing about what's really behind these products. I told you I would talk a little bit about the nutrients and mimicking, having products available that try to mimic meat. That can be a real challenge because these nutrients that people need across the life stages are really very striking. When you think about adolescents, for example, look at all the nutrients that are short. And these are nutrients that are considered public health concerns because they're short. And what you'll see is that beef nutrients are a problem in a lot of different life stages: iron and zinc and choline and protein. And you're seeing those nutrients pop up there, vitamin B6 in the older population. So the nutrients that beef can deliver are really important at various life stages, starting in the early years. And that's been a big push for us in the last few years, because checkoff research over the last 10 to 15 years has really been looking at the introduction of meat early in children's diets to get those nutrients. And hopefully by now you've heard that the 2020 dietary guidelines for Americans had recommended the inclusion of iron-rich foods like meat for babies starting at around 6 months of age. 6 months of age is the time frame in which children start introducing feeding real foods, first foods, complementary foods are sometimes called, into their diet. And it's a time in which their nutrition needs are really high, and meat is an important, delivers important nutrients that are especially needed for infants. This is fascinating to me, and I always like to show this to really make that point. Breast milk is, as we know, the best nutrition for our early infancy, but around 6 months of age, a mother's breast milk starts to decline naturally, regardless of her diet, in iron and zinc content. So her breast milk starts making less iron and zinc. And that happens around 6 months of age. That's exactly why we use this term complementary feeding, because we need nutrients that complement the nutrients of breast milk, and breast milk starts to decline in iron and zinc. And guess what? Beef is one of the best sources of iron and zinc that you can consume. And those go together for important complementary feeding. So that's one of the whys behind why meat is so important in the early years. And what we know is that so many infants in the US aren't getting enough iron and zinc. If you fed a baby in your life, or even recently, you probably know that there's a lot of iron fortified cereal, and you're probably recommended to include iron fortified cereal. But one of the trade-offs that we've had with the adoption of more breastfeeding, which is nets out to be definitely a positive thing is that iron and zinc intake have gone down, especially among human milk fed infants, because if babies are being breastfed and they're more often, then their mother's milk is naturally declining in iron and zinc. That can have an impact. So there's been a lot of effort to make sure that mothers know about the importance of introducing iron and zinc rich foods. And it's earlier than most people realize, starting at around 6 months of age. And this isn't really necessarily new guidance. The dietary guidelines made a new focus on this for the first time. But even before that, the American Academy of Pediatrics and the World Health Organization and other organizations have recommended the introduction of meats. I worked as a WIC dietitian in South Texas, where I live, and meat was one of those foods recommended, but there's not a lot of awareness around that. This is some of the work that the checkoff has done to show how do you do this, because a lot of mothers have questions about, is it a choking hazard? How can you introduce beef at such an early age? And there's different methods developing for how mothers are feeding babies. When I fed my own children, the spoon method was the primary method. You fed baby beef purees, and then as they grew and developed their textures and had more fine motor skills, they started moving on to their textures, to lumpy mashed texture, to a soft finger food, and then a table food. But there's also a new method for feeding babies that is very science-based, and many mothers are choosing to use, and it's called baby-led weaning, where the infant kind of guides that feeding, and you don't feed your baby directly with a spoon. You let the baby use their utensils to feed themselves. And they would even maybe start eating a steak strip at around 6 months of age. If it's the right size, you obviously can cut it so that it's not a choking hazard. They hold on to it like you see in the picture, and they can gnaw on that. And there's this bib, you guys might have seen them. Kansas Beef Council might make them, I don't know, but several state beef councils have done this. The bib says, "When I get teeth, feed me beef." But the truth is, you don't even have to have teeth to eat beef. And that's kind of a myth about beef and how to introduce it. But we show the different textures, and we're helping mothers and dietitians and pediatricians understand how they can safely and effectively introduce beef starting at around 6 months. It's not just infants, though, that have iron needs that are of a concern as of late. We've talked for many years about how many women fall short in iron, but this is actually some recent research that has come out. We did not support this research as the checkoff, but it's very useful to us to see that iron intakes, there's rising iron deficiencies in both men and women, and that may not be over time. So even as our nutrition is getting better in the US and the world, we still have, as I showed you from the very first slide, a lot of room for improvement. And even with all the availability of fortified cereals and fortified products and all that, we're still not meeting our basic iron needs, our basic nutrition. And we know that that correlates, and the authors of the paper actually point out that correlates, that the declining rates of iron sufficiency in the American diet are correlating to our lowering of our beef intake. We know that beef intake during the time period of that study that I just showed you had declined about 15%. But since the first dietary guidelines in the 1980s, beef consumption has declined about 25%, while poultry consumption has nearly doubled. And as I said earlier, both of them are high quality proteins, beef and poultry, but they're not equivalent when it comes to iron. Beef has so much more iron, so much more highly available iron than poultry does, and that can have nutrition impacts. So it's not so easy to just swap out certain meats and expect our nutritional status to stay the same. Why have people cut back on their beef intake over time? As I showed you, we know heart health is still a big reason why. And one of the things that I just would want to reassure you on as advocates for beef is that this is probably the area that we have the most research on. The Beef Checkoff and other groups have funded so much research. We now really understand that you can eat a heart healthy diet with beef, and you can lower your cholesterol, you can lower your blood pressure, you can improve all your heart health risk factors. And eating beef doesn't reduce that effect any more than eating chicken or fish. So you can include beef just as efficiently and as effectively as you include chicken and fish to get the same health outcomes for heart health. We've done a step 1, which was the old American Heart Association diet recommendations, the DASH diet, which was for a long time and still very much is considered a gold standard heart healthy eating approach that tends to be defined as low in red meat or beef, but you can have beef as part of the DASH diet and lower your cholesterol just the same. The Mediterranean diet, which has gotten so much attention, you can include 5 to 6 ounces of beef as part of any of these recommended heart healthy diets and still get the same health outcome. And I think that's a really important concept that we still try to focus on and educate the public about. You can have beef as part of your heart healthy diet and still have those same health benefits that you're expecting from your heart healthy diet. Lean beef is a big part of that because most heart healthy diets to date are still wanting overall to be a little bit lower in fat. And this is where lean comes in. The consumer still definitely likes the option of hearing that there are lean cuts of beef, that we have so many cuts of beef that are lean because of ways that we've been raising cattle differently, trimming beef at the grocery store so they're not having to buy extra fat when they purchase their beef. And there have been some great strides made to make sure that not only is beef leaner, but the great news, if you had some of our meat science and meat quality folks giving you a presentation, you'd also hear that the quality of beef has increased. We have more choice and beef in the supermarket today than we do Select. When I started as a dietitian working for beef farmers and ranchers, Select was the #1 grade of beef sold at the grocery store, and now it's Choice. And we can still have more than 20 cuts of beef, 25, almost 30. There's more than 30 cuts of beef that are Choice that are still lean. So the grade, having a higher marbling and a higher grade doesn't really affect the overall fat composition too much. It's trimming off that external fat where we can really make a difference with beef and ensure that we have an option of offering consumers leaner beef. These are some of the definitions of how it qualifies as lean beef. A lot of times people ask me that. For a 3-ounce cooked serving, it's got to have less than 95 milligrams of cholesterol, less than 10 grams of fat, and less than 4.5 grams of saturated fat. That's what we know what a lean is. A tip that consumers like to hear is if it has loin or round in the name, it's a lean cut of beef, like strip loin, sirloin, top round. And then 90% lean or leaner beef is considered lean as well. Now, having said that, a lot of consumers want to eat leaner beef and they're looking for that option. They love to hear that we have plenty of lean beef options. Some do not. Some have been following the science on saturated fat and they know that maybe fat got a bad rap and some fat in your diet is good. And especially those that are in the keto and the paleo side, they really maybe aren't as focused on lean cuts of beef. They're focused on the fat profile. They like getting fat in their foods. And one of the things that's helpful for the public to know is that of the fat that beef does have, about half of it is monounsaturated fat. And that's the kind of fat found in olive oil that gets so much positive attention. And even beef saturated fat, only about a third of it can actually raise cholesterol. About a third of it doesn't raise cholesterol. That's stearic acid, the same kind of fat that you find in chocolate that it gets a lot of attention for. So really when you peel back the onion layers of beef's fat content, what you see is much of the fat in beef won't raise cholesterol levels. And that's why you can see these studies with heart healthy diets and be including beef in there every day, if that's what you want to do as your protein of choice. So I just want to transition now as we start to get closer to your opportunity to ask questions and engage is what are we doing with this information? How are we reaching physicians and nutrition experts with our good news on beef nutrition? This is just a snip from our long range plan initiatives. This is what we would show our nutrition and health committee, our producers, when they're helping us develop our research and our program priorities for the checkoff work. But this is where nutrition fits in many of our long range plans initiatives. You'll see the producers want us to focus on educating medical and diet health professionals about beef nutrition, engaging positively in these conversations, promoting the role of beef in a healthy and sustainable diet. And I have a flag here on this where it says improve the business and political climate of beef. As a checkoff, we work on the business climate. We don't work, sorry, and I see a typo on my slide, but we don't work on the political side as a checkoff, but we do work on sharing science to ensure that beef is included in the dietary guidelines for Americans and in other dietary recommendations. So why do we focus on health professionals, registered dietitians, for example. I get that question a lot, like, are dietitians the group that we need to go to? And this data comes from another organization, the International Food Information Council. It's not Beef Checkoff market research, but essentially it starts to ask consumers, who are the trusted sources? And what we see is a registered dietitian still ranks right up there at the top, and so do other health professionals, as people who are trusted to provide information about which foods to eat. And we see actually from our own market research that consumers tell us that they still look to a registered dietitian for that trustworthy information about beef nutrition. And many consumers are not going and directly seeing a dietitian, like they're not having private counseling sessions with dietitians. But as you might have seen, dietitians are getting often in the media, or they're quoted, they're very active on social media. So they're having their impact that way, as well as those that are actually seeing registered dietitians seeking out their services or being recommended to see their services by their physician. Health professionals are increasingly, they definitely have the power to encourage or limit beef consumption. They're increasingly, as I said, more involved in the media. This is Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. She is a physician who focuses her practice on muscle-centric medicine. She's all about helping women and men get into their best physical shape and how to eat nutritionally. She really is a very huge advocate for protein intake across the day, and protein to support muscle, and the important role that muscle plays in improving your metabolic health. And this is just an example of one of the quotes that she had recently, and the impact that we're seeing more physicians being active and being quoted in the media. So another reason why we need to continue to work with these folks. They're also becoming much more of a presence online. This is Dr. Candace Jones, a pediatrician who we work with, who has a podcast out. She's a board certified pediatrician who sees patients most days of the week, and then she hosts a podcast for parents to have a bigger impact. Dr. Lyon, who I just showed you, has about 115,000 followers on Instagram, on social media. And Dr. Jones's podcast is fairly new still, but it's got about 4,000 subscribers. So they're able to reach many more than those individual patients that they're seeing on a daily basis. So what have we been doing? Well, we took the science on beef as a first food, and actually how to do that, and reinforcing that there is recommendations to include beef, and we put it in pediatrician magazines, the magazines that pediatricians are reading, like the American Academy of Family Physicians or the American Academy of Pediatrics, Contemporary Pediatrics. These are the ones that are coming across their desk that they're reading, and we've got ads placed in those. We've reached about 350,000 pediatricians and family physicians over the course of the summer and into the fall. We also, with a lot of help from our Federation of State Beef Councils, we were able to have some additional funding to put materials in office, in doctors' offices, in pediatricians' offices, and childbirth centers. We've got about 2,200 of those offices around the country that are receiving materials that are there for the physician to know about, but also the parents that are in waiting rooms and looking for educational information. We're just about ready to start evaluating that program. This was a pretty comprehensive program. It's been a long time since we've been able to have a reach where we can actually provide physical materials right in doctors' offices. And so we're going to be evaluating that program very soon to see if that's something that we want to continue to do. But it was great to be able to have that opportunity to get those beef-specific materials right in pediatricians' offices through support with the Federation. One of the things that, when we did our own research with pediatricians and physicians, they told us that continuing medical education, doctors need to get continuing medical education to keep their license. And they said that that's one of the ways that they keep up with research. So we don't just go to conferences where doctors are, but that podcast that I mentioned with Dr. Candace Jones, she had some of the other experts join her. And then her podcast has continuing education. So doctors will listen to a podcast, they'll get some of their medical education approved. And that is information that we're able to provide the latest research on beef. And we're doing those kinds of activities as well. And then we can promote that and get more attendees to listen to her podcast. We also host webinars. It's sort of an old-fashioned thing like we're doing right now. I mean, at one point it didn't seem like webinars were as big of a thing as they are now, but post-COVID. And we have great success with our webinars. This one on the early years, we had over 1,500 live attendees. Just last week, we did one on more of the topic of healthy, sustainable diets. And we had 2,500 register and 1,500 attend. So we can reach a lot of health professionals with information that directly relates to what the conversation that we're wanting to have with them about beef nutrition through our webinars, and our state beef councils can help promote them and get their attendees to go to attend as well. So this is just another example of the kinds of activities that we're doing to reach physicians and dietitians. I want to just close with a couple of minutes about what we can continue to do as an industry. Like, these are great programs that the Checkoff is doing, and we want to keep these going and doing them, but we've got to keep supporting nutrition research. Even when sometimes people say, well, we do the research on the same thing. Well, yes, we're still doing heart health research, because even though we have great studies that show that beef is good for a heart health and a heart healthy diet, we still have heart health as a major limiter for beef demand. So we want to keep contributing science to the new discussions that are happening. And we're so fortunate to have a Checkoff program that invests in nutrition research. We want to keep pushing the dialogue on good quality science. Nutrition science is actually a fairly young science, and we're still improving our methods. And a lot of the bad rap that beef gets in the nutrition science world is because we're relying too much on weaker forms of science that doesn't establish cause and effect. And we need to push the nutrition research community to continue to improve their methods of evaluating research, especially as it relates to beef. And we can do that through funding research, and we can also do that through dialogues with scientists about ways to improve methods to get more accurate research on beef and health in the future. And continue to look at contemporary topics. I mean, this is a great example. In the Netherlands, this research was just published looking at blending or putting together a diet that has beef and vegetables and dairy products, and looking at real life issues like upper respiratory tract infections. I know my kids are a little bit past that stage now, but there was a time and they'd get a cold and you take them to the doctor and miss a day of work, and they'd miss school, and you just find out, well, it's an upper respiratory tract infection. There's nothing we can really do about it. But this research has shown that a healthy diet with beef actually reduced the number of days with the symptoms of upper respiratory tract infections. And I think that kind of practical, those health benefits that we may be taking for granted are new areas of research opportunity for us. And then we need to just appreciate and realize that beef is consumed in a variety of dietary patterns. I talked a lot about all the positives today of including beef in a healthy diet, but a lot of people still enjoy beef as a double bacon cheeseburger, a soda, and a fries, and they do that pretty frequently. And burgers and fries are awesome, and they can be definitely a part of a healthy diet, and we love to promote burgers and fries and that. But I think we have to realize as an industry that we still need more attention placed on the fact of encouraging the public to eat a healthy diet with beef. We need more images, we need more recipes, we need more meal solutions where beef is being paired with more vegetables and a better and in a more balanced way, and a more balanced diet, more sensible portions, that kind of thing. So encouraging healthier diets with beef, we got to stay science-based, which I think we already are. And that's one of the reasons why we've made the progress that we have. Continuing to be open and transparent. Our consumers want to have an honest dialogue with us. And the more that we can have that opportunity to do that with them, the better off we are. Take their feedback and evolve as an industry, which I think we're doing a great job in that area, and just continue to get better. And hopefully it'll continue to nourish us for the next 2.5 million years. And I think we'll bring together the topics towards healthy, sustainable diet. We'll talk about how our protein is unique and why cattle play a unique role in that system to help us get the best protein that we can get to nourish ourselves. So with that, I just want to say thank you. And I think I've got time for questions if we want to take some.
You bet, Dr. McNeil. I really want to encourage our participants today to ask questions in the chat box or unmute yourself. Dr. McNeil is a great resource, and we have her on right now. While people are getting their thoughts together, you've been doing this a while. What myth about beef is the hardest that you've found to debunk? And are there certain findings about beef that have surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the tough ones to talk about is cancer, because it's very difficult. You can't prove a negative, right? So I can't tell somebody that beef doesn't cause cancer. right? Because even though I know the evidence doesn't say that it supports a relationship between meat and cancer, there's a lot of other reasons why. The research that has tried to associate meat with cancer, I think there's a lot of other reasons why that research has shown that. The main reason is that in people who have an increased risk for cancer for eating red meat, they have a really unhealthy diet. They also have a higher likelihood to smoke. They have a lower likelihood to be physically active. They have a lower likelihood to get health screenings, that kind of thing. So there's a whole lifestyle dynamic that goes with that. But when you're talking to someone and you cannot prove that something doesn't do it, you can't prove a negative. I think that's hard. That's a challenge. But most people, what is effective in talking about cancer is really talking about that cancer is a complex disease and no single food can cause or cure a disease. We often talk about that. And that really the research has shown that it's people who have overall unhealthy diets and lifestyles. So that's helpful, but it can be a tough conversation. What I'm surprised to learn about with beef, not surprised, I guess surprised, but appreciative, is that when you look at this infant feeding data that I shared, and you look at the recent research that says right now, so much of our population is not getting the iron, and that directly relates to reducing our beef consumption. I'm surprised and reminded by the fact that beef really does play a role in offsetting nutrient shortages in the American diet. So it really is holding its weight or carrying its weight in terms of giving the nutrition that we need. And now what we got to do is continue to shift the image that it can be associated with a healthy diet. And it's not sort of this negative image that it's always associated with overconsumption, indulgence, and even obesity.
That's great. How did you work with the USDA to help influence the role of beef in the most recent dietary guidelines? Was that a difficult sell?
It's a long process. And as the checkoff role, our role, and the great thing about the dietary guidelines process is it's an open public process, and everybody's encouraged to contribute research and information and any perspectives to the dietary guidelines. As a checkoff, we're not allowed to do any lobbying or that kind of thing. But what we can do is we can conduct scientific research, and we can provide that research through public comments. And we even give testimony on the research. And I think that was what the process is. It's a long process. The dietary guidelines are written every 5 years, and we're already talking about the next set of dietary guidelines. So you work on them for 3 or 4 years before they're actually published. But the fact that the checkoff had such good research, and we have staff that were able to package that research and continue to provide it and hold the committees accountable to looking at the research to influence the guidelines. I mean, the bottom line is that when you have scientific evidence that shows these gaps and shows what beef can provide, we have a much stronger case. And in this situation, we had enough evidence to really show that. So I think that was the way that we were involved, and it was effective at the end of the day.
Very good. That is a great win for beef.
Yeah.
We had a question come in. Where could we find the research, the study that showed that 5 to 6 ounces of beef could be consumed in med and DASH and still get benefits?
Yeah, that's good. So that's another thing I should say, that one of the other things that the checkoff allows us to do through our funding is when research is published, if you want to find the actual scientific paper and take it to your doctor, most people don't want to read the actual scientific paper. You want to pick it up, take it, share it with a scientist, or share it. It would cost you like $30 to $40 to download that presentation, because you have to buy access from the scientific journal. But we're able to negotiate an open access rate. So any of the studies that we have supported are open access for anybody in the world to download. Most of these studies you can link directly through beefresearch.org, but I'll look at the chat and I can send you a direct link. If you just Google the name of the study, you can probably get directly to the link where it's available at the journal and download it for free. But you can also get them through beefresearch.org. And I will look at the chat after this. I can't see it from the lens, the screenshot I'm on now, and I can drop some of those direct links into the chat.
It looks like there is a link that our dietitian Abby dropped in on the Mediterranean diet, so that might be one to follow. It looks like a lot of our participants today are dietitians as well as producers, great. So that's really great information.
Yeah, that's great.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is there any research being conducted to link the consumption of beef and the reduction in COVID-19 symptoms or the actual ability to beat this upper respiratory disease?
So we are completing a literature review right now. One of the processes that we sometimes do when we do nutrition research is to first look at all the data that's available on the topic so we can better inform the research question or the gap that's needed. So we're just about to complete a review with Purdue University looking at the ways that beef may be associated with inflammation, immune function, and all, and then that would inform future research that we do on the topic. So I would say that we've got some scientific assessment on that going, and it's definitely a topic of research interest for us.
Excellent. At this summer at the Beef Board Nutrition and Health Committee meetings, I was excited to hear about the study regarding beef's unique nutritional value as a matrix, and you mentioned that in one of your slides on the deck. A uniquely complete food like breast milk. We've all known what a great food stuff beef is, but this was a different way of looking at it. Do you have any thoughts on explaining this further?
Yeah, I think you're going to start hearing more about the matrix. We're talking about that. And for the dietitians on the call, you'll probably appreciate this too, because I think that the example of the work that I showed you from Dr. Stefan Van Vliet from Duke University, where I showed you that the meat alternatives aren't the same metabolically as real meat, sort of begs the question, what is the function of the meat matrix? We've known, for example, for a long time, I learned in my training as a dietitian that meat has heme iron. We all know that, but that there's also something in meat and beef called the meat protein factor. And it helps you absorb more of the iron from beef because it has this factor called the meat protein factor. And so that's an example of the whole food matrix being put together in a way that has a health impact. And one of the research areas that we are trying to understand how to better do the research on is looking at that matrix, because as you know, I'll use protein as an example. Once we started to get more science to understand that protein in its own right had benefits with regards to let's say appetite control or muscle building, and started getting more attention around protein, we saw every food come out with protein rich foods and market their food and add protein into almost everything. But the question is, what about the real original food that it comes in that whole matrix? So I think that's an area of research that we're beginning to look more at. Nutrition scientists, as a general rule of thumb, scientists in general like to isolate compounds so they can study the independent effects. So they have to think really hard about how do you look at a whole food in a diet. And we've been hosting some scientific discovery sessions with some of the leading scientists in the country to say what would be the best way to approach research to really get at that whole food matrix. And I think the kind of research that Stefan Van Vliet has done, looking at the metabolomics, is one of those areas. We're about to do some other work looking at iron and zinc and the package of meat and how iron and zinc are better absorbed from whole meat foods than individual components. That's some other examples. So I know that's a long answer, but I think this real food piece is really important.
It's exciting stuff, and it's a new way of looking at it, especially for a producer.
Yeah.
For those people that are beef ranchers, what do you see as the biggest opportunity for us to be able to share beef story? Is there a certain way we need to be presenting things?
It's such a good question. And we were in meetings last couple of weeks where we kind of went back to the demand drivers, right? I mean, the beauty of the checkoff is that you're there to drive to beef demand. And the beauty of beef demand, at least for those of us who love nutrition or want to tell our nutrition story, is that nutrition is in its own right a demand driver. So then comes the question is, Amy, is like, what is the best way to do that? What do I say? And what I can say about that is that I am just always reminded and blown away by the fact that we have done market research over the past 20 years to say, what is the way that you tell someone that beef what's the secret sauce to telling them that beef is good for them with their nutrition, and that helps them understand that the best. And what we have seen over and over again is the same thing. You pretty much just need to help them understand the nutrients that beef provides. Most every nutrition message that we test works. It's because the consumer is listening. They want to hear that beef is nutrient dense or nutrient rich, that beef has nutrients that you need for growth and health, and that it has high quality protein. So I wouldn't overthink what specifically you say, as long as you're hitting on the fact that beef has high quality, it's great nutrition because it has, and then list them out. Let's show them a couple of examples. We've learned that they like to be reminded, oh, iron, zinc, B vitamins, like list a few out, and protein. And also the other a small tip is that it's a kind of a turnoff to people. They love beef. They don't want to hear us as the beef industry saying we're better than all the other choices that they may be making. So it's not that you have to say beef is better than chicken or beef is better than these foods. That beef in its own right has special nutrients that you need that are hard to get from other foods. And it's nutrients like iron and zinc and B vitamins. So just hitting that nutrient richness and that protein is very effective.
Okay. Okay, very good. Thank you so much, Dr. McNeil, for what you do and for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us today. Thanks also to all of you participants who joined us. We appreciate what each one of you does for our beef community and recognize your time is valuable. We are glad you are with us to hear more about the latest in beef insights. Again, today's meeting was recorded and will be available on the Kansas Beef website at kansasbeef.org on the Beef Hub tab. Feel free to share this recording. Let's get the facts out about beef and also help fellow producers learn more about what their checkoff dollars are funding. On behalf of the Kansas Beef Council Executive Committee, I'm Amy Langbard, and I'm pleased to have served as your moderator for this Beef Insights webinar. Thank you.